We'll do a whole thing. Okay, we're gonna do a whole brief history of speedrunning and the speedrunning meta, real quick, just so you can understand. So far we've had 4 patches. Okay, I'm going to call the patches 1, 2, 3, and 4. Their proper names are 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4. But you know, one time a 0 stole my girl, so we're not going to do that. So 0.1, patch 1, when the game first launched, the speedrun meta was extremely poorly understood because the game was brand new and there just wasn't enough time for strategy discovery. Um, as a consequence, it it's just the case that all that we know that was good this patch was that Angormus was an individual player who was good. So Angormus gets a plus sign. We also know that Warrior, as a leveling class, was good. And the reason that we know that is because Angormus was essentially the only good player in the entire world, and he played Warrior. So to give you some idea, the margin of victory for Angormus in the first race that ever happened was 48 minutes. It was a 2-hour race, and he won by 48 minutes. Okay? Now, if you look at Angormus's initial strategies compared to what we would be able to do now, Angormus in patch 0.1, like, would be bad by modern standards. The other thing that we don't know is how good he was at all because he was the only good player, just period. So if we had had what we have now, which is a community of people who share strategies, who send each other build plans, who post clips, who discover strategies and share them, who solve layouts and so forth, times would have been a lot faster, and Angormus's times might have looked pedestrian, but we don't know. We also don't know if any other class was good. So it's possible that Warrior was in fact average, but it was just the class that was played by the best player. Okay. There were a couple of other classes that we know were probably good. Okay. It was probably the case that Witch was really good in 0.1. And the reason that we know that Witch was really good is because there were 2 players, Zhaoji, who is a Chinese player who no longer competes, and Guy That Dies, who's an Australian player who um, who played Essence Drain Contagion Infernalist on Demon form. And that Essence Drain Contagion stuff was probably much better than it looked because we just didn't have super high skill players practicing it. So that's one way of viewing it. We can say like Witch, and then we can give Witch like a little squiggle. Okay. There was a bug in 0.1 that affected Mercenary, which is a super interesting bug that we'll talk about super quickly. So if you see this node, Overwhelm, and I will put it in a part of the screen where you can read it, Overwhelm says increased damage with 2-handed weapons. Okay. And what's interesting is if you read the tooltip for crossbows, okay, crossbows are defined in the game as being 2-handed weapons. It says crossbows are 2-handed weapons that require strength and dex to equip. However, in 0.1, there was a bug or an oversight where this set of nodes that are all 2-handed weapon damage didn't apply to crossbows. So crossbows were bad in 0.1, but that got fixed late in the patch. Okay. Now let's talk about 0.2 for a quick second. In 0.2, the Huntress was introduced, and there was a combination of a particular skill and a particular support gem which was broken. Okay. So the name of the skill was Rake. Rake was a spear skill, what Rake does is it allows you to jump forward and slash at an enemy with your spear. So you would go, yeah, with your spear and try to slash through someone, and you would jump forward while doing it. What you would do is you would socket into it a support gem called Stomping Ground. And what Stomping Ground said at the time was, for every single step that you take with any travel skill, create an aftershock that deals 100 to 150% of your strength as physical area damage. Okay? So what that meant was Rake would do 2 instances of damage, and those instances of damage would be tied to your strength, and it was melee area attack damage. Okay? So, as a consequence, to give you some idea of how valuable that is, right now, a typical desert rune, like just a lesser desert rune that you can get in Act 1, deals 5 to 8 fire damage, and you can only put 2 into your weapon. Every single travel node that you can get on the tree that you would assign strength to would add between 5 and 7.5 base damage to Stomping Ground times 2, because you take 2 steps. So every single travel node was twice as valuable as a low-level rune. As a consequence, the best class extremely clearly, it wasn't close, it wasn't arguable, the best class was Warrior. And that's because Warrior had strength and access to area, melee, attack damage. Okay. We also know that there were 2 really good players who existed, or 3, depending on how you want to count. Angormus was still the best player in the world, and he won Race 1 by a lot. It wasn't close, it wasn't contested. Race 2 of Season 2, a mysterious player on an alternate account that had under 100 hours played showed up, and that character's name was Jose _ El Diablo _ Rake 23. Okay. And that player created a new strategy that no one else had ever tried, where usually in Race 1, what people would do is they would level up with Rake Stomping Ground until they got to some other level, like level 28 in the case of Warrior, and then transition to Perfect Strike. And that and that strategy was really good, and then Angormus won Race 1 with it. But what Jose did was Jose showed up and leveled up only to level 23 to get a giant flask, and then ran all the way to Doriani at level 23 using Stomping Ground the whole way. What ended up happening was Jose, by being underleveled, opened up a giant gap against Angormus, multiple minutes. I think it was 6 minutes at the time that they killed Jamunra. And at the time, Act 4 didn't exist yet. So all that we had was Doriani. And Jose played, by modern standards, extremely poorly. I am extremely confident that Jose would agree that Jose played poorly. Because there were just like obvious mistakes. Like in Motlin Waterways, Jose died. In against Viper, Jose had to reset against Viper because of a combat error that no top 10 player would currently make if they had even like a couple days to refresh their memory before anything else. But then in Race 3, Jose disappeared, and instead, Guy That Dies logged in. And remember, we knew that Guy That Dies was good in patch 1 because he won Witch and finished like 3rd overall in one of the races. So we knew he was good. We knew he wasn't as good as Angormus, but he was within 10 minutes or so by Race 3. And then Guy That Dies logged in. He hadn't participated in Season 2, Race 1, or in Season 2, Race 2. He is one of the people that's speculated to be Jose. There are a number of reasons to believe that he might be Jose. The two of them have similar play styles. And Anglormus at that point was completely convinced that Stomping Ground at level 23 was a better strategy than leveling up higher. So we had a 2-man race in Season 2, Race 3, where Guy That Dies had about a 1-minute lead out of Act 2. And then Anglormus caught up to him, and the two of them were extremely closely tied. And then in Motlin Waterways, Guy That Dies died. And as a consequence, the race was extremely close. They got to Viper at the same time. And then Anglormus won that race by about 40 seconds. Okay. So now we know that there are 2 good players, and there are a bunch of other players who are also good, but they aren't playing Warrior, so it's hard to make a direct comparison because Warrior was so much better in the Stomping Ground meta than anything else that we don't know how good these other players are. So I'll give you some examples. We knew that there was a player named Arco who completely dominantly swept Huntress. No one was close to as good as Arco on Huntress. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't worth discussing. Arco was the best Huntress player in the world. And when in the postseason, Arco played some Warrior, and Arco's practice times looked similar to Anglormus and Guy That Dies practice times. The same thing is true of Whole New Society. Whole New Society played Mercenary, but Mercenary was so much worse than Warrior that we just don't know how good it was. But we knew he was the best Mercenary player in the world, along with a player named Driz. There were a couple of other names who were also competing at the time that weren't quite as far up the ladder. But the only other really good player from O.1, Zhaoji, at this point had retired. We haven't heard from Zhaoji in a race since then. Although we know he still does play PoE2 in general. In O.3, the thought was that Anglormus has at this point won all 6 races. Okay? At this point in history, between O.2 and O.3, Anglormus has won every race. And so the widespread belief is that Anglormus is S tier and everyone else is A tier or lower. There's just a level difference. Whether that belief is accurate or not, we don't actually know. In O.1, it certainly was true. By the time of O.2, we don't know. And in O.3, as you'll find out, it ended up not being true altogether, although you can still make an argument. So in the off-season between O.2 and O.3 is when I got really good. My practice times in O.2 were as good as anyone's. I started practicing around the O.2 race cycle. I participated in the O.1 race cycle. I didn't do well. I didn't finish. I was a noob. And then around the O.2 race cycle, I started practicing and I got really, really good in the off-season between 2 and 3, and I became friends with Guy That Dies, Anglormus, Arco, Whole New Society, etc. I'm friends with all these guys on Discord now. And at the beginning of O.3, Stomping Ground was nuked from orbit. We can explain how it happened. They changed the tags on a bunch of skills and so forth, but this is the basic idea. And so now everyone's back to trying to figure out what the best skills are. A couple of things happen. One is they don't introduce a new class in O.3, but they do introduce a bunch of new weapon skills. So for example, Shield Wall gets introduced on the Warrior, which didn't previously exist. We didn't have shield skills. And so Anglormus and I and Guy That Dies think Warrior will probably be good again like it was in O.1. And other people go back to playing other classes. So for example, some people play Lightning Arrow. And Whole New Society plays Grenades. And if you watched Whole New Society play on his Twitch streams, his practice times were better than Anglormus's Shield Wall times. Okay? And Anglormus has won all 6 races, but Whole New Society is playing Grenades. So maybe Grenades are better than Warrior. Maybe. We don't know. Because there are only... I'll say that there are 4 good grenade players in the world at this point. Whole New Society is the best grenade player in the world. Guy That Dies can play any class, and Driz is probably the second best grenade player in the world. There's another player named Screws who starts on Witch in Season 3 Race 1, and he wins Witch, and then transitions to playing Grenades in the subsequent races. There are a couple of other players that are worth mentioning if you want to have like a complete understanding of the race meta. I'm one of those players. There's a Ranger player named Kiom who's worth mentioning. Jackal Coach is worth mentioning. There are quite a few Chinese players who rise to the fore at this point. A Chinese player named Jiluo, who plays Witch, rises to the fore. He plays Essence Drain Contagion. There's a player named Bin, who plays Warrior on Shield Wall and isn't quite as fast as Angormus, but is competitive. Arco switches over to playing Shield Wall and isn't able to keep up with Angormus. Bunka is another good example of someone that you might want to mention. So there are like, at this point, there are like little constellations of players forming. There's a big English-speaking community of people who all talk to each other on Discord, and there's a small Brazilian community, a small Chinese-speaking community. Bunka is a Russian speaker. And so there's like little pockets of things growing, and the amount of communication between players goes up, especially in both the English-speaking and Chinese-speaking communities, because they're just the largest communities. And so that means that there's a level of learning that goes on where there's just more people to try new stuff and communicate with each other because you speak the same language. So we end up thinking that there's an inherent belief that, and this is mathematically backed, that armor and stun threshold are like much better than other forms of defense. So for example, energy shield and evasion and ailment threshold are less important than armor and block and stun threshold, which means that the strength and strength hybrid classes from the defensive perspective, so warrior and mercenary, and later on druid, are probably the best classes defensively. Offensively, it's completely ambiguous which of three builds is actually good. Okay. Looking back, as an expert level player and talking to other people who are expert level players, no one has any fucking idea what the actual best build is offensively. It's either Shield Wall Warrior, or it's Grenades, or it's Essence Drain Contagion for mobs and Bone Storm for bosses. And I'll explain a little bit about the pros and cons of each. So Grenades appear to have the best single target damage of all these builds, it appears. They also have an advantage over Shield Wall because Shield Wall, like all melee skills, requires you to stand still to cast a skill. Which means that every single time that you cast Shield Wall, you're standing still for 0.4 of a second. You cast it a few hundred times, that's a minute of time loss. Grenades, however, have long detonation timers, high mana costs, and long cooldowns. They have better damage, but if you throw out your nades while you're moving and then you don't place them correctly or time them correctly for the mob to be on top of them when they explode, you just miss. And that means that grenades have a higher requisite mechanical skill ceiling if you want to continue moving while firing. Okay. The other thing is that in order to have a good grenade run, you need multiple crossbow upgrades. So you need to have a level 1, 4, 10, 16, and 33 crossbow all happen to you over the course of the run. So that's 5 crossbow upgrades. You probably only need the first 3 to be magic crossbows, but then you need to craft 2 different yellow crossbows over the course of the run, and you need to have multiple good modifiers for the crossbow to be good. Which means that just the RNG of whether or not you win your Regal and Exile slams on the currency that you have in the speedrun really influences the amount of damage that you have on grenades. The same is not true of Shield Wall. Shield Wall, from a defensive perspective, is much more stable. So you get to hold a huge, gigantic shield. And also, the number of different possible modifiers that can occur on a shield is much smaller than the number of different possible modifiers that can occur on a crossbow, which means the probability of getting the one you want is higher, right? If I roll a 20-sided dice, the chance of rolling the maximum number is 1 out of 20. If I roll a 6-sided dice, I have 1 in 6 chance. So as a consequence, it's easier and more consistent because you need to craft fewer things. You only need 1 good shield. And the probability of it hitting is better. So the average outcome of Shield Wall Warrior in terms of DPS is higher, but it's a slower and clunkier skill sort of inherently. But it's easier to use because you just simply don't need to be that precise in how you use it. Whereas with grenades, if you don't time them correctly, you can throw them out and then the enemy can move, and then they'll explode and the enemy's over here and takes no damage. From the point of view of combat fluidity and ease of use, the easiest skill to use is Essence Drain Contagion. Essence Drain Contagion clears mobs and deals exceptionally well with the league mechanic we had in 0.3, which was Abyss. Abyss, if you're a brand new player, I'll refresh your mind. Abyss is the name for the green fissures that can occur in some maps, out of which large mobs of monsters crawl, where there's a high number of low HP monsters. This is the perfect situation for Essence Drain Contagion, which spreads from enemy to enemy to enemy as the enemies die. So having a dense mob of low HP monsters allows it to proliferate faster. However, the classes at that point in 0.3 that are the best for spellcasting don't have any access to armor or block or HP scaling or stun threshold. So as a consequence, Witch is probably offensively, in terms of mob clear speed, the best class, but in terms of bossing damage is slightly worse than grenades especially, but also slightly worse than Shield Wall, but it has a much more fluid combat playstyle. Because of its defensive struggles, you have to level up slightly higher in order to have more points to spend on your tree. The other thing to say is that you need, in order to have the best possible race, you need an exceptionally rare modifier to occur on your weapon, which is you need the modifier +2 to the level of all spell skills. That modifier, if you pick up a staff off of the ground, and it's an item level 5 staff, and you put 1 transmute and 1 augment on it, the chance that you're now holding a weapon that has that modifier is around 0.8%. So it's 1 out of 120 staves start with that modifier. Now, if you fill it up to 6 modifiers, the chances of running into it is much higher than that, but you don't want to spend your limited regals on something that doesn't already have the best modifier in the hopes that you run into the extremely limited probability of hitting it. Because you only get so many regals. So, which from the item RNG perspective is an extremely tough RNG focused class. It's just super rare. Okay. So what we see going into the patch is that there are these 3 roughly equivalent builds, and then Gormus's practice times are a few minutes slower than the practice times of Whole New Society, who up to that point was known to be a top 5 or top 10-ish racer, but Angormus was completely dominantly undefeated, and all of a sudden Whole New Society playing a different build looked better. So everyone goes, oh my god, nades are better than Warrior. It turns out that it's actually, in retrospect, ambiguous whether or not Whole New Society was just simply a better player than Angormus, or Angormus got exceptionally bad RNG in those races for shields. Uncommonly bad RNG. Okay? Because the expectation for a Warrior is that your shield that you'd kill Tavakai with would have a floor of 160 armor, and there were some runs where he didn't beat that floor, which is super uncommon. Okay? So everyone looks and sees Whole New Society get a really good time on grenades, and Guy That Dies get a really good time on grenades, and Driz get a really good time on grenades, and Angormus has a bad race and finishes in 3rd on Warrior, whereas positions 1, 2, and 4 are nades. But we don't know how good Warrior really was, because there was only one super elite Warrior player, because no one wanted to compete with Angormus. But also Angormus got exceptionally bad weapon RNG in that run. What ended up happening after that race 1 was the top of the ladder, because of the population of players that played grenades, looked like grenades was dominantly better than anything else. We don't know if that's actually true, because the population of players who have memorized all the speedrun layouts, who have practiced all the boss fight mechanics, who have optimized everything to the speedrun level, who have their menuing practiced down, etc., is extremely small, And that means if one person gets a really good weapon, which is rare, and one person gets a really bad weapon, which is rare, we just don't know what would be good or not. So, Season 3 Race 1, nades blow everything else out the water. Guy That Dies wins, Whole New Society second, Angormus third, Driz fourth, a bunch of other nades players in the top 20. Then we see all of the top players who aren't playing Warrior switch to nades. Now remember, I said that on average, getting a good shield is easier than getting a good crossbow. But now we have 6 players playing nades. We have Whole New Society. We have Guy That Dies. We have Driz. We have Screws. We have Shackle Coach. We have me. We've got like 6 players who are good. I'm probably not good. I probably don't deserve to be in that conversation. But like we've got a bunch of people playing nades, all of whom know layouts, all of whom know this. And that means that if 1 or 2 of them get an uncommonly good weapon, people will just go, all nades again. But we have the sample size for nades for rare events to happen because we just have a larger cohort of people competing. This makes nades look insanely good. Okay? All of the Ranger players are playing nades. Now, the reason that the Ranger players start playing nades is different. Like I said, armor is better than evasion defensively. So if you're a Ranger player and you want to play with armor, you need to apply a lot of points to strength. If you apply enough points to strength, you no longer can equip high-level bows because you don't have the dexterity. You spent all your points on strength. So as a consequence, the Ranger and Huntress players switch from playing Lightning Arrow to playing nades because their defensive strategy forces them into a stat spread that pushes them towards nades as well. So now we have like nades is the best strategy on Monk. Nades is the best strategy on Huntress. Nades is the best strategy on Ranger. Nades is the best strategy on Mercenary. And there are 10 nades players in the top 15, and they're beating Angormus, who used to be undefeated. Well, it turns out that probably Angormus got, if you look at these specific items that he got in those runs, Angormus probably just had like really bad RNG or like substandard performances and ended up finishing third, and 7th as everyone else was glomming onto one strat. The other effect is when you have 8 people playing the same strat, tiny optimizations start being made because people start exploring for competitive advantage within the tiny space of one build. So like there are all kinds of funny things that end up happening on Tree. But long story short, people talk about this as being a grenade meta, but if you get into a call with me, Guy That Dies, Angormus, Driz, Screws, Shackle Coach, and you ask people like, what do you think is actually the best thing in 0.3? A bunch of people would go like, I don't know. Like genuinely, the top players would go like, I don't know. I played nades because I liked nades and because it's the thing that I locked into practice. But in terms of like what's actually the best thing, I don't know. We also know that Shield Wall got really good here, and we know that Essence Drain Contagion plus Bone Storm was good here. However, this build struggled because there was no defensively strong class that could play it. The other thing is this is the first time that Angormus lost a race at all, because the first race, Guy That Dies won. The second race, Guy That Dies was in first position and then logged out, and Whole New Society won. And in race 3, Whole New Society ran away from the field, including Guy That Dies and Angormus, and blew everyone out in Season 3, Race 3. So at this point, everyone goes, oh my god, nades are so good, but that's probably a population effect. That's probably like the hive mind centralizing. It's probably not mathematically true that grenades are head and shoulders above everything else. They might be the best build. They're probably the best build. But we don't have enough sample size to make a fair comparison. And so you shouldn't have the like locked in belief that this is definitely the best thing. Then 0.4 happens. 0.4 is the most interesting speedrun patch that's happened so far, but it coincides with a number of super unfortunate things that are suppressing elite player participation in the races, and we'll talk about those. So the first thing is, in the beginning of 0.4, two things happen which blow up the popularity of speedrunning by a lot. Funnily enough, I was involved in both of them. One is Angormus gets accepted to Games Done Quick. And if you're unfamiliar, Games Done Quick is a speedrun showcase of all different types of speedrunning games, and it has an enormous, it has an insanely large audience, like 50,000 live viewers and 200,000 on YouTube after the fact. Okay, so it's a huge deal for exposure for Path of Exile 2 in general. Okay, that's one thing to start. The second thing, which is really interesting, is a number of people make league start guides that do super well. So at the time, I'm friends with Guy That Dies in Angormus. Like, I'm not some celebrity thing. It's just we're 3 dudes in a Discord. And at one point, I get a DM on Discord from Guy That Dies that says, like, hey, man, I'm going to do a league start run. Can you just, like, commentate? Because he just likes my commentary. So I get into a Discord call with him, and he's playing, and I'm narrating, and that becomes a YouTube video. And that YouTube video is the most viewed league start run in the history of Path of Exile as a franchise. It has 210,000 views on YouTube. Because it just we timed it right or something, or the YouTube algorithm liked it. And so instantaneously people are going, oh my god, nades are this, because it's the most viewed YouTube video ever is a nades run that's narrated by me and played by Guy That Dies. So like Guy That Dies and I each get like hundreds of new followers on Twitch. He blows up from having no subscribers on YouTube to having 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. And then I play, then we go to GDQ and I'm the commentator for that, and Angormus is playing, and that's a huge moment of exposure for the game as well. And so now we have this like super dominant we have this like super dominant view that like nades are the best thing. Okay. Then O.4 launches. O.4 launches at the same time that that video blows up, and the same time that that Angormus goes to GDQ, and I'm the commentator for each one of those things. And that results in an explosion of people who want to learn layouts, who want to study things, and so on. And then Druid gets introduced to the game. And I'm going to talk about two things separately. Druid as a class and primal skills as a like skill set. Okay. We'll talk about Druid first. What does Druid have on tree? Druid has a huge amount of extremely generic flexible damage. You can do spells, you can do attacks, you can do melee, you can do ranged. Druid tree extraordinarily flexible. The strongest of the super early leveling for Druid is probably spells, just because the spell damage amounts over there are really good. And second, Druid is a strength int hybrid class, which means that it can wear armor because it has strength on tree and it has increased armor on tree, which means that offensively it has access to Essence Strain Contagion and to everything else. It can play nades, it can play bow and arrow, it can play shapeshift skills, it can play maces, it can play shield wall, you can do whatever you want. And you can wear armor. So Druid itself, the tree, the class archetype, is extremely strong. Secondarily, we get a couple of new skills which are kind of complicated to understand, but we'll go through all 3 of them. One is Pounce. Pounce is a level 3 gem, which means you can start using it at level 6, at character level 6. And that gem allows you to jump forward. But you remember how I showed you grenades, and grenades were an area of effect, projectile, attack, detonator, fire skill? Well, Pounce is a meta shapeshift slam minion mark travel slam skill. So it has like 8 different tags on it, which means it can be used in a huge number of different ways. You can treat it as a travel skill, as a minion skill, as a slam, as a melee skill, as a shapeshift skill, and it gains from all these different sources. So the number of different ways that it's used in speedrun builds is very flexible, but there are 2 avenues in which it's extremely important to understand. The first is that it's a travel skill. Unlike Leap Slam, which can't be used until character level 22, Pounce can be used at character level 6, which is halfway through Act 1, less than halfway through Act 1. So as a consequence, you could just pounce around, which is really strong. The second thing is that it's a mark skill. When you pounce onto someone, you apply a status to them called marked, and by default, that mark is what's called Hunter's Mark, where when you kill them, a baby wolf is born from their corpse somehow. What ends up being the case, though, is that applying a mark allows you to use various different support gems. I'll give you 2 examples, but there are more than this. One is that it allows you to apply a support gem called Mark of Siphoning, which gives you mana leech. So you start the fight by pouncing onto the boss, and then now you fight them normally, and you're just recovering mana from the attack damage that you're doing, which is exceptionally strong as a strategy, because it solves a lot of the resource problems for a lot of different builds. The second example of this is that you also apply a support gem called Mark for Death. And what Mark for Death does is it converts your physical damage into armor break, and armor break gives you more physical damage, which then does more armor break, which then results in fully broken armor, which is a damage multiplier for all of your physical damage. So these 2 supports solve problems for Shield Wall, which has problems with sustaining its mana and does a lot of physical damage. So that's one thing. The second thing that happens is that there's also a pair of skills that are level 7 gems that can be used on any build. Okay? One is Ferocious Roar, which is used in 2 different ways. Ferocious Roar is a Warcry skill where you shapeshift into a bear and go rah. Okay? This also generates maximum rage. Rage is a mechanic that sustains itself for a few seconds and gives you 1% more attack damage for every 1 rage that you have. And your base cap of rage is 30, so it's a 1.3 damage multiplier, 30% more attack damage. A lot of classes, including Mercenary, didn't previously have access to that damage multiplier. So within the context of speedruns, it just was like a damage multiplier that you could just pluck out of thin air and just have. You just had this damage multiplier now that you didn't used to have, which is sweet, right? There's another skill that exists called Cross Slash, and Cross Slash is a really weird skill. I'll summarize the tech like this. If you apply Freezing Mark to an enemy, for example, and then freeze them, you get temporary extra cold damage. 30% extra cold damage. Your base damage plus 30% cold damage. This requires you to freeze them, though. You apply Freezing Mark, and then once you freeze them, you get extra cold damage. But that's not what happens with Cross Slash. With Cross Slash, you mark the enemy, and then you Cross Slash them, and the mark activates, giving you that bonus damage, no matter whether or not you froze them. Meaning that now you can just pick Freezing Mark for 30% extra cold damage, or Voltaic Mark for 30% extra lightning damage. So you're just creating damage multipliers by using the mark tech in order to be able to get extra cold or extra lightning. You're using Ferocious Roar in order to get rage. And what this means is Mercenary now has access to damage multipliers it didn't have before. Warrior now has access to damage multipliers it didn't before. And Druid now exists. And Druid is an Essence Drain Contain user, which is the most fluid mob clear skill for leveling, that has access to the best defensive tools in armor and stun threshold. So as a consequence, we now have a 3-horse open race at the beginning of the season. Everyone believes that grenades are good, but now there are new damage multipliers for everybody, there are new defensive scalers for everybody, there are new utility skills for everybody, and we have a completely new class. So everyone's like, oh my god, we're all so excited. We have to theorycraft new stuff. We have to find out, are grenades actually good? Is Shield Wall, the new improved Shield Wall, better? Right? I'm sending notes back and forth with Guy That Dies in Angormus. People are messaging each other. A whole new society is trying low-level strats. The Chinese players are all collaborating on different stuff. They're coming up with new witch tech. Huntress looks like it might be good because it has access to the Druid skills early on. A lot of the Druid skills look really, really good, etc., etc., etc. Then they do the most exciting thing that they've ever done for Path of Exile 2 Racing, which is they announce the existence of ExileCon. And ExileCon is a convention in New Zealand for the game, which by itself may not be particularly exciting to a speedrunner. Maybe you don't like conventions. Right? Yeah, that's another. There are even more damage scalers that I didn't mention. Premax has a good point there. But the thing that's important about ExileCon to speedrunners is that ExileCon has races, and if you win the race, you make, if it's the same as last ExileCons, you make $10,000. If you win the qualifiers, they fly you to New Zealand, 4 players. You then compete on main stage in a theater in front of a bunch of people with commentary. And then that commentary goes out to people. And then if you win, everyone believes that you're the best player in the world and you make $10,000. So everyone goes, I want everyone to believe I'm the best player in the world. I want $10,000. I want a free vacation to New Zealand. I'm going to lock the fuck in. And so people start like doing insane volumes of practice runs and like huge amounts of map studying, and they start like, can I run at a lower level? Can I do this? Can I body block this boss? What if I manipulate the boss to get into this corner? How can I use all these different cross-class synergies and so on and so forth? And then they just don't announce when the qualifiers are. And then a month passes. And then a month and a half passes. And then they announce the races. And these races aren't qualifiers. And so now everyone's spent 6 weeks burning themselves out, trying super complicated, frustrating strategies, trying to get a competitive advantage. And they then try to get hype for these races, but these aren't the qualifiers. And I'm burnt out and I'm not having any fun right now because I spent 6 weeks grinding thinking that the qualifiers were going to happen. And then I just can't get my pony up anymore. Simultaneously, Path of Exile 1 has its most exciting competitive event. The Gauntlet, hosted by Zizarin, sponsored. There are prizes for doing things in the Gauntlet. And a lot of the Path of Exile 2 runners, not all of them, but many, also play Path of Exile 1 at a competitive level. And they think, well, I'd rather prepare for the Gauntlet. And then the Gauntlet is at the same time as the PoE 2 races. So why would I play the thing that I don't want? It doesn't give me the prize that I care about. I don't want to do this. So they log out. Then we see Season 4 Race 1 has an all-time low for the number of finishers with 35. Well, 41. However, something that the community likes happens, which this is bragging, but also like it's true. Everyone really enjoys, all the speedrunners enjoy my commentary because I'm like part of the group, right? And they like that I know what I'm talking about because I'm one of them. We're in the same Discord, so we're sharing builds back and forth. I'm doing practice on Twitch. They're hanging out in my Twitch chat. We're talking to each other. So like I'm a part of the group, and then I got offered a commentary contract for one of the races. So like that's the only good thing is that like one guy who isn't them gets offered a commentary contract, and they're like, "All right, I'll log in for that one." And that's why Season 4 Race 2 like was such a weird race because like the participation level was super low, but then people like, and it's not ExileCon qualifiers, and like maybe you want to hide a strategy if you have something you want to hide a strategy to get that, and it's all, you know. So like next week we expect Guy That Dies to not participate. We expect Angormus to not participate. We expect Screws to not participate. Whole New Society might not participate. So, you know, that's the meta. So, like, when you ask the question, Troy, of like, what's the best leveling skill? Everyone thinks it's nades. Yeah, if you don't pay that much attention and you just look at the top of the ladder, then you'd believe that nades are good. For leveling, anyways. Because that's what the speedruns are. They're a leveling race. If you ask the top speedrunners, the people who've done the practice, the people who are sharing the builds, what's the best leveling build? Most of them will go like, there's a tier of builds of nades and shield wall and essence drain contagion with bone storm, and it's like still totally fucking ambiguous what the actual best thing is, because like item RNG matters and who the player playing the build is matters, and what the layouts are matters, and whether or not you get good boss cycles matters. And so it's like still ambiguous. It's completely fucking ambiguous what the best skill actually is, because we just don't fucking know. So like, we don't know. The God Amongst Men asks, are the quals going to be in 0.5? Presumably, but I don't know. I don't know. I think so, but maybe not. There should never be a best skill. I mean, we're talking about speedrunning, right? Like, there's always a best thing. It's speedrunning. The best speedrunning skill, like, is the one that makes my number the lowest. But like, it's different in endgame where like things have different strengths and weaknesses, and like maybe you prefer bossing versus mapping versus temple versus getting through Sekimas versus selling items versus whatever, and then like different specialized builds matter, and like your preferred playstyle matters, and your currency amount matters, and like best is measured differently according to how much you enjoy things. But in speedrunning, like best is best. It's the one that makes my number the lowest. So meh. Meh. You know what I mean? Like in endgame, I absolutely like I don't want anybody to play anything that they don't like. So by the way, thank you for all the follows during that rant, Lamau. Gave a really long lesson on the history of PvG speedrunning. But like I really genuinely think that this last race is like a really good example of like how we don't know what the fuck is the best build, because the top 6 finishers in that race were on 6 different classes. Right? Like the top 6 finishers in that race were on 6 different classes. I don't know. I don't fucking know. Anyways, like we'll see what happens next week. I think I'll probably just clip that and make it a YouTube video. So like the